I'm here this morning to act as the interviewer for my brother Cabell, who is doing this tape to describe and report his part and his exploits during World War II. I have done a similar tape myself. I did mine several months ago when I was in Tyler, Texas. But they're both part of the Veterans History Project. My brother and I, in addition to being brothers, have a couple other things in common when we talk about World War II. First place, both of us graduated from the Virginia Military Institute. I about 4 years ahead of him. And both of us went into the Army. Both of us went to war in Europe during World War II. We were fortunate enough, shortly after the Battle of the Bulge, and my unit was in a period of, might say, rest and recuperation. I found out where he was, went to visit him. He returned the visit, coming to where I was in France. So we had a brief, very important brotherly family reunion there in 1945. So Cabell, I will now let you take over and tell us where you were and what you did during World War II.
Well, thank you, Bill. You did have some pleasant memories together, and still do. Well, my Army experience started when I entered VMI, Virginia Military Institute, in September of 1940, which was a year and a half or so before Pearl Harbor. And I remember Pearl Harbor because at VMI, I was on the horse-drawn field artillery, which I think you were too at the time. And I was riding a horse on White's farm, and came back in from the afternoon, and somebody told me the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. So that's the first I'd heard of it. So anyway, I was at VMI in September, and that was in December of 1941. And after early 1942, the superintendent of VMI, General Kilburn, who had a very distinguished World War I record, called the whole Corps of Cadets over to Jackson Memorial Hall and said he had been up to the Pentagon, the War Department, and he had arranged for us to stay in the enlisted reserve corps and graduate if we wanted to sign up for what they call the ERC. That we would be in the regular Army, but that we would be able to graduate. So most of us signed up, went down to the gymnasium and signed up for the Army. My roommate, Ethan Stroud in Texas, and a couple other brothers decided they didn't want to do that, so they went uptown and joined the Navy. And they were able to graduate, unfortunately, because the War Department needed everybody, so suddenly they just called everybody in early 1943 into the war. So being in the horse-drawn field artillery, I was sent to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, as an enlisted private. I went through basic training at Fort Bragg. And when I finished basic training, for some reason, I received orders to be transferred to the Signal Corps. So they transferred me to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. And I was the only one in our unit that was transferred, and I've never understood exactly why. But anyway, I think it's because I was majoring in electrical engineering, and they needed people with some of those skills in the Signal Corps. So I went to Fort Monmouth and got there and had to go through basic training again as a private, because then I was supposed to go to OCS. But while I was in basic training, Fort Monmouth had a football team, and I was playing football for them, and I fell on the football field and broke my left arm. And fortunately or unfortunately, it wouldn't heal. But before I went to OCS, I'd been told that when I graduate from OCS, I'm going to an infantry division to be in the signal company of an infantry division. I didn't know which division or anything, but then I was delayed healing of my arm for about 3 or 4 months. It wouldn't heal. My left arm wouldn't heal. So finally it did heal, and I went to basic training and went to OCS. And when I graduated from OCS, I was scheduled to go to the 70th Infantry Division in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. So I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and joined the 570th Signal Company at Fort Leonard Wood as a second lieutenant. And I was put in charge of what they called in the Signal Company of an infantry division, the inside person, and I was responsible for the communications in the division headquarters. And the colonel in the 570th battalion was Colonel Wagner, and we went up to Boston and got on a ship outside of Boston to go to Europe, and that was in January the 8th, 1945. So our whole division was on one ship. It was the Ile-de-France, which was a French luxury liner before World War II, and we went unescorted into southern France and landed at Marseille. The southern France invasion had already started and had already cleared out in southern France, so we disembarked in Marseille in peace. There wasn't any hostilities there at the time. And then we convoyed up to Lyon, France, where the fighting was. So our infantry division was part of the 9th Army, and we went around Lyon, and we were part of the invasion of Lyon, France, and then went in combat from Lyon up to a place called Saint-Jean-Rohrbach, which was north of Lyon by about 50 or 75 miles. We went 20, 30, 40, 50 miles a day, which was at that time of the war. And we were scheduled to be at Saint-Jean-Rohrbach, and I think it was there that my brother Bill found me, and we had a little visit. And that was the jumping off place for us to go into Saarbrücken and cross the Saar River and capture Saarbrücken. So my job during the war, Colonel Wagner changed my assignment, and instead of putting me in charge of the communications in the headquarters, he put me in charge of what they call the long lines. So I was in charge of maintaining communication between the division headquarters and the 3 infantry regiments out in front of division headquarters, because the general of our division was stationed in our headquarters where I was, and Colonel Wagner had the responsibility to the general to keep communications up, so he was in constant contact with all 3 infantry divisions and the artillery battalions with the infantry divisions. So my job was to go back and forth between headquarters and the infantry division to keep some kind of wire communications, because we couldn't use the radio in safety, because the radios were always available to the Germans. So we tried to have hard lines wherever we could, which was an interesting job, because moving 50, 60, 70 miles a day sometimes to maintain wire communications was not the easiest thing in the world, but we were able to do it most of the time. So had a bad experience in Forbach, which was the jumping off place before we crossed the Saar River. That was in France, which was right in the Saar Valley. And I was out there with the infantry division in a Jeep driven by an infantry division driver, trying to find a way to get lines back to the to headquarters, and a German 88 shell hit in front of my Jeep and blew the Jeep up and killed my driver, but didn't hurt me. It just blew me out. I was just on the ground, and it didn't hurt at all. But I got up and everything was disabled. I found a ride back to the division headquarters, and so that was a terrible experience. But anyway, by the time I got back, we'd crossed the Saar River. They'd had Bailey bridges and been able to cross the Saar River, and the Germans were in retreat. So our division captured Saarbrücken, and from there we went on in Germany up to a place called Bad